I wanted to make some comments because you had mentioned about the story that we all heard
Mm-hmm.
about in the past that that Buddha had on one of his arms walk, he met a ascetic,
Mm-hmm.
and he was basically torturing himself. The idea of by doing that he can change his karma,
Yeah.
so when he comes back, he wouldn't suffer as much. In fact, back in the days when I was a professor at UCLA, I was there from the mid '80s until the mid '90s, almost 10 years. And there was a time when I had a lot of graduate students from India, and so actually one of my best PhD students was from India. And so we had a discussion, and I asked him. I said, Buddhism came from India, but it's basically extinct
Yeah.
in India. And in fact, there are more Catholics than there are Buddhists in India. And Catholics are not, they are not even the top three. They're like the seven or eight religion.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked him why that is. And his answer is interesting. He says, first of all, the Hinduism is very encompassing. So Buddhism didn't really go extinct. It just got incorporated into Hinduism, which is not exactly true. Not at least not the teaching of Buddha, but
Yeah.
the idea that Buddha himself was a prince and he was a deity and all that. That is true, but his teaching is basically extinct now in India, which is ironic because when you go to meditation class, 10-day Vipassana, you see a lot more Indians there. And so they're
Mm-hmm.
discovering Buddhism. That was one thing he said. And the other thing he said is that in the India religion, we cannot change karma. So actually, when we see someone on the street who's a beggar, you're not supposed to help them. Because if you help them, then you're kind of taking away his process of, redeeming himself, which is kind of wild. But that's what he
Yeah.
said.
Uh-huh.
But that is in fact what the historical Buddha was trying to change. Because until he came along, karma, the word karma was something that was not changeable. It's from your previous life, all the good deeds and bad deeds, whatever it is. It's like a cosmic record, and now you have to kind of either suffer through. So when you look at a person who's very rich, then he deserves it. And when you look at someone who's suffering, well, he deserves it too, right?
Yeah.
And I think Buddha was the one that says, no, that is not true. In fact, in the Heart Sutra, we say, the five skandhas are empty. That exactly that. That yes, you
Mm.
can change.
Yes, you
And
can.
so more than a month ago now, Venerable Hong came to Oakland and inaugurated our Sangha in Oakland, where we meet once a week in Oakland, California. My first physical meditation class since pandemic. And
Mm-hmm.
so I have a lot of I'm not a lot, but I'm starting to build that group with Tin, who was one of Venerable Hong's student when Tin was incarcerated. And so next Monday, I'm actually teaching a class now, 14 students. All of them are Tin's co-workers. They actually have a retreat and they wanted to learn about meditation and chi practice and all that. And
Okay.
so Tin asked me, and 14 of them, all of them have been incarcerated, you
Wow.
know. So how to deal with trauma and all that. And so Tin asked me and says, Denny, what would be the topic of your class? How would you summarize what you're going to teach? And so I said, it's easy. So I gave him the title for next Monday's class, and it says it is just that. It says trauma is not my karma.
Mm-hmm.
Trauma is not my karma. And so I think knowing you and knowing your background, you had suffered, and we talk about this over and over again in the past, both in English and in Cantonese, especially in Cantonese, talk about your father being a very abusive person, not only to you, but especially to you, that he was a drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine all the trauma that he has suffered from, being, escaping the war, escaping the draft, and seeing
Mm-hmm.
all the death around him, and also how when he came to Vietnam from China, suffering poverty and probably loss of prestige.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine his father, your grandparents are, they lost everything too. You know, so you talk a great deal about generational trauma and how that can pass on, from parents to offsprings.
Mm-hmm.
And you yourself suffered trauma. You talk about how you were physically abused every day. That
Mm-hmm.
we make fun of how, if last time when Dr. Kwok was here, Joanne was here, we were talking. She was talking about psychedelic, and she talked about ketamine, and I mentioned about ketamine being totally illegal in Singapore. If
Mm-hmm.
they find any quantity in you, even if they find that it's just for your own use, and now if they find that you are a dealer, you're actually distributing, that might be the death sentence.
They're sentenced.
Yeah, but I think if just even a trace amount is 5 years plus whip,
Mm-hmm.
you know, whip. And I think you talk about how when you were a child, your father would came home and he was drunk and he puts it out on you and he will whip you, with this branch
Bamboo
until
sticks. Mm-hmm.
bamboo stick until the bamboo stick broke in half. I mean that
No,
is how
four or
bad.
five pieces.
4 or 5 pieces. Yes, I wasn't there, but I can imagine. But that speaks really to your teaching. Is that if you didn't have the opportunity to learn about Buddha's teaching, and that you didn't immerse yourself in his teaching by being a monk, um, your life would have been very different.
Yeah.
Your life would be very different. I can imagine a scenario where you talk about how you left Vietnam as a refugee with your younger brother, and you spent 7 days in a boat, a very small boat with 200 other fellow refugees, and because you boarded the boat first, and so you were stuck in the bottom deck.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had moved, you would have lost your space, right?
Yeah.
And except for the first 3 days, you had no water. Even when you had water, it was just like one spoon at a time, twice a day. I mean, I
Yeah.
just cannot imagine that. And then you were witnessing a two brothers, twins, who was fighting for
For the
urine.
urine.
I cannot imagine that. And then you said you came here 19 years old, and in Cleveland, Ohio, and you were old. You were too old to be enrolled in high school, but then you study on your own, get your equivalency, and then you started your college, got your first degree, your bachelor degree in computer science, and then got your second
Electrical.
degree, electrical engineering,
Electrical.
electrical engineering,
Mm-hmm.
correct, in Chase Western, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got your master's degree, and all this time you were working two jobs, one in a Chinese restaurant in, washing dishes, and another one was, I forgot what, but in any case, and then eventually you got a job working as an engineer, and then you went back part-time to get your MBA,
Mm-hmm.
and then either before or after you were able to sponsor your family to United States, your parents plus your five other siblings, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you said you had basically forgotten about your dad, or try, or at least temporarily shut it out. And then when you saw him, you saw that same abuser again, not to
Flashback.
you, flashback, and you
Yeah.
you saw that abuse towards your mom, towards your other siblings, very abusive behavior. I can imagine, like you had PTSD, and then all of a sudden it triggered, and you could have just I mean, seriously, people done a lot worse than going out and buy a gun and solve the problem once and for all.
Yeah.
That can happen
Yeah.
and has happened. And you've seen
Yeah.
many of them in jail that's exactly what happened, right?
Correct.
But your trauma didn't become your karma. You were able to change your karma. So I think today's talk is just that, is that it's important to understand that a lot of what you're suffering are internal, that are from the past, whatever it is, either that you were directly being abused or that you are indirectly being abused. The trauma could be this generation or former generation, but whatever it is, I think the way you help those who are incarcerated is that by using the word trauma, you allow them to have a conversation, but
Yeah.
you don't make it into victimhood. I think I think that's what I got from your talk today,
Hmm.
is that
Yeah.
there's one thing to recognize that you've been victimized. It's another to think that you are a victim forever, because
Hmm.
you can
No.
change that.
Yeah.
You can
Hmm.
change that. That's what you said. Like the the double arrow. Buddha made that um, use that example of the first arrow is your abuser. The
Hmm.
second arrow is yourself.
Yeah.
And if you, instead of just removing the arrow and let yourself heal, very often we remove the arrow and keep stabbing ourselves by hanging on to the past, you know. And so those are we call that the hindrances,
Hmm.
right? The attachment, the aversion, and all that. So